Namaskar, my name is Dr. Amritanshu Srivastav and I am an Associate Professor at Environmental Science and Engineering Department at IIT Bombay. In this video lecture, I will be talking about environmental management system, which is a paradigm shift that recently, in recent years, many of the industries and organizations have shifted to. And as you know, conventionally the environmental management has been something which is externally forced to various industries and so on, where they are suggested what are the compliance levels and so on which they have to meet. And from this approach, there has been a paradigm shift happening in past few years and so on, where the industries and various business entities are observing environmental management as something which should also be internalized and should be managed properly within the industry or the management itself, rather than something which is to be forced from outside. And this paradigm shift is happening because more and more number of industries, business entities are now observing the benefits they will get out of implementing this particular approach of environmental management system, where they can revise their policies, revise the work culture of the organization and so on, and then it will improve the overall environmental performance of the entity, and then it will result in some advanced business and so on as well. So as a formal definition, United States US Environmental Protection Agency, they have given this definition where environmental management system is a set of processes and practices that enable an organization to reduce its environmental impacts and increase its operating efficiency. So what it means is that EMS is a set of processes and practices which any particular industry or organization can implement within its premises, so as the overall environmental performance and the efficiency would increase. They will be able to reduce the adverse environmental impacts and so on, and all of this is happening from within the industry or the business entity itself, rather than someone from outside asking or forcing them to do so. So in the process of EMS involves where you have to identify and list all the relevant environmental legislations which are applicable to the particular industry or the entity. Once we have listed all these environmental legislations, then we also have to identify all the activities which are ongoing in that particular premise or the entity or the industry, and then what are the associated environmental impacts, whether those impacts are beneficial, whether those impacts are negative and so on. And if those impacts are negative, then also to set up various environmental goals that okay, we have to meet this particular environmental goal and so on, so as this particular legislation is met or the permissible limits and those kind of things are met. And then once these targets are set, then the management will also make various action plans to achieve those targets along with various timelines and so on, and then proper monitoring of how far we have achieved those targets and things like that will be done. And in the process, proper records of every activity, every action and all the things which are happening in the business premises or the industry, they will be maintained. And of course, a regular review of the entire system will also be taken, so that if there are something which is not going as per the plan and so on, then corrective measures can also be taken, and then further improvement in this whole process of environmental management can be implemented. So when a particular environmental management system is developed, there are various goals to it, and one of the most important goal of any environmental management system is to meet the regulatory requirements which are there in place for a particular type of industry or business entity. And then in order to do that, EMS also gives us idea about how to better control the operation which is happening in the particular premise or the industry. For example, if it is a chemical industry or chemical plant, then all the chemical manufacturing processes, process controls and things like that, they should be proper, and so that the adverse environmental impacts which are associated can be further reduced, so as we are meeting our regulatory requirements, and not only meeting the regulatory requirements, we are also improving upon our environmental performance in much better than what regulation requires us to. And another important goal is which motivates more and more industries and business entities to actually adopt this concept of environmental management system is that with the EMS, these industries and the organizations can convince the customers that we are serious about the environment, we care about the environment, and then our products and processes are environmental friendly because we are taking care of the environmental aspects of our business, of our manufacturing and so on. So all the environmentally conscious customers, they will be biased, or they will prefer to adopt the or buy the products and so on from coming out of this particular industry or the business entity. So this is one of the major motivation for the industries and business entities, because they will be able to sell their products and processes to the customers being more environmentally friendly and so on. And since EMS is a continuous process of monitoring how the business is happening within the entities and so on, how each process is there, how the management is happening and so on. So it gives the top management an idea about what are the loopholes which are existing and what are the areas where further improvement can be done, particularly for the environmental performance. And with this continuous monitoring feedback, they also get an idea how things are to be improved, and in order to do that, and in this process, they will also be able to gain with some advantage over their competitors who are not following this regular feedback, regular monitoring and things like that. And of course, if the overall environmental performance of the business entity or the industry improves, if everything is going as per the plan, they are meeting all the regulations, regulatory requirements and so on, so the associated costs on environmental liabilities and insurance, particularly for the environment, will be reduced, because then the industry and business entity will not have to spend so much amount of money on these liabilities and so on. So when a particular industry or entity implements this environmental management system, then there are certain costs associated and certain benefits also which come out of it. Some internal costs are like whatever the manpower is there already present within the industry or the business entity, they will have to spend sufficient amount of time in developing this environmental management system, and then also to implement all the action plans and things like that which are being laid out in this EMS. So a considerable amount of time or staff time goes into all these things, and then which is one of the major internal costs that comes out of implementing this EMS. And then some other employees will also have to devote their time and so on in meeting the requirements or implementing the EMS and things like that. Sometime it may happen that the required expertise to implement environmental management system is not available in-house, so the management will hire some external consultant or agencies to suggest various measures and things like that, and in that case some external cost will also be incurred. However, these costs are far outweighed by the potential benefits which a particular industry or a business entity can derive after implementing the environmental management system. And some of these potential benefits are like they will be achieving improvement in their environmental performance. They will also be having enhanced compliance to all the regulations and laws which are there in place. They will also help in pollution prevention as well as resource conservations. They will be able to reach out to new customers as well as markets which are more environmentally conscious in nature and so on. And then in the process they will also be able to increase the overall efficiency of their business. For example, if this is a manufacturing process or a chemical plant, then in order to make the whole process more environmentally friendly, better and greener technology will be implemented, so the overall efficiency of the whole process will improve. And then it will also reduce the overall production cost associated, because some other types of externalities will be taken care of. And then the enhanced employee morale will also be there. Implementing EMS within a particular industry or entity will also enhance the image in the eyes of the public, regulators and various other stakeholders, because they will see the business entity as someone who is environmentally conscious and making serious efforts in achieving the environmental performance, sustainability and so on. And of course, the employees of the business entity or the industries will also become more aware about the environmental issues and their responsibilities. So it is a kind of a iterative process where subsequent improvement in the environmental performance will further be achieved, which will eventually help the industry or the business entity. So this PDCA model is one of the very important model of environmental management system, which captures all the important aspects which should be covered in any particular environmental management system. So here there are four stages: plan, do, check and act, which is also a cyclic in nature. So plan means that the top management will after discussion with various consultants or the in-house experts, they will make a plan of what all things need to be done in a particular industry or in a particular business entity, so that the environmental performance will increase or will improve. And in the process they will identify various rules and regulations which are applicable, various permissible limits which are to be met and so on. And once they have made the once they have identified all those things, they have identified the key areas where more amount of work is needed, then they will also be making various action plans. Okay, so if this particular goal is to be achieved, then this is the action items which are to be done in this particular time frame, it is to be achieved and so on. So after this planning is done, the actual implementation of all the work items which have been identified will be done in the next stage of do, where in addition to the implementation, various training programs to the employees and so on will also be done. Various process modifications which are required to control or improve the environmental performance will also be done. And in the process it may happen that sometimes things do not go as per the plan, so regular monitoring of the progress is also important, and that is taken care of in this third stage of check, where regular monitoring of all the things which is happening, whether they are happening as per the action plan which was set earlier and so on, is not there or not. And so this is the step of check, and with this internal audits and things like that will also happen, various corrective actions will be taken and so on. And in the last stage, the overall implementation of this whole EMS, the planning, whether our planning was proper, whether the targets and goals which were set, they were proper, where the action plan which was set, where the timeline which was set was proper, where the implementation happened properly and so on, whether our auditing was proper and things like that. So everything will be reviewed properly, and then this will give the top management a better idea about how to actually go ahead and implement or design a better environmental management system. So it is kind of a recursive iterative scheme of subsequent improvement in the environmental performance. So after this all feedback, the top management will again devise better management plans and things like that. They will have a better idea about how to implement and so so on, how to do the corrective and monitoring, so on, and then it will again give a sufficient understanding for a further improvement in the whole process. And eventually, if this PDCA model is followed properly, the environmental management system is proper and they are being followed sincerely, then over the time period, the overall environmental performance of a particular industry or business entity is bound to improve, and so on. So now it helps in the systematic identification and remediation of the environmental matters, and as I mentioned earlier, it also helps in systematic improvement in the environmental management system itself. So because of all these things, now various industries and business entities have recognized the advantage or the benefits of implementing EMS within their premises and so on, and they have been doing it on a very serious note. Of course, so far implementation of environmental management system is not compulsory, so the industries, they take up at a voluntary level, and then they do what is required for their particular industry or particular plant or process and so on. So the one challenge in this is that since there are n number of different types of industries, business entities and so on, so they will design their environmental management system as per their requirements. So it may happen that many of the industries or even the industries of the same type, they may have different structure of the environmental management system, and sometimes it may happen that particular industry will not recognize the EMS which is being implemented in another industry and so on. So sometimes it may also result in various trade barriers because and so on. And if it happens at international scale or international level, where one of the country will say that industries in a particular country, they are not following the EMS as per our requirement and so on, so we are not going to do business with them. So if these kind of trade barriers occur, then it is not proper. So this particular aspect was recognized by the international community, and then need for widely acceptable framework and environmental management standards was seen. And then in order to address this particular need, this International Organization of Standardization, in 1991 they had set up this strategic action group on the environment, which is also called as SAGE, and the primary objective of this SAGE was to check the usefulness of drafting of EMS standards. Idea is how can we actually standardize the whole process of EMS so as we can not have multiple versions of EMS floating around in different industries and so on, having so much variability. Can we have some standards of shape and structure of this environmental management systems and other related aspects on environmental management? So that was the primary objective of this particular group of SAGE, and they had done their surveys and so on, and after they submitted their report and they suggested that yes, it will be useful to have the environmental management standards in place, then ISO formed this technical committee 207, or also called as TC 207, in 1993, and the mandate of this technical committee was to draft ISO 14000 series of standards which cater to environmental management system being part of it. And then a subcommittee of this TC 207 had actually drafted the environmental management system standards, and these standards were agreed upon in Oslo in June 1995. And all these ISO 14000 series standards which cater to environmental management and environmental management system, they are based on some basic principles, and these principles are, for first they have to understand all the activities and processes in an organization. So any environmental management system or any standard for any activity for environmental management, the first and foremost principle is that all the activities and processes which are ongoing in a particular organization, they are to be understood. Second is that once these activities are understood, then all the potential impacts, beneficial or adversary, they have to be identified on the environment. Once we have identified these impacts, then we shortlist those activities which are having adverse impacts, and then we make various plans how we can actually eliminate or minimize the occurrence of these adverse impacts and so on. In the process, we also identify the regulatory requirements on environment which are there, and then if they are not being met, then we set various targets to bring the whole business within the premises or within this legal framework and so on, so that all the regulations are met. Then all the we have to also establish the monitoring mechanism, so that all the action plans which are being set, all the targets which are being set, whether they are being met properly or not. If not, then corrective action should be taken when things move out of control. And then in case of emergency, some emergency preparation plans should also be in place. And then the procedures for verifications of proper functioning of EMS should also be in place, and of course the proper comprehensive documentation of all the procedures and records should be there. So the environmental management standard, these ISO 14000 series standards, they are based on these important principles, and you will notice that these are all important aspects in achieving the proper environmental performance by any organization. So what is the structure of these ISO 14000 series standards? So these ISO 14000 series standards actually cater to the environmental management aspect of any organization. Now depending on whether they focus more on the process or more on the product, whether they are compulsory in nature or they are voluntary in nature, they are classified into various terms or various classifications. So first classification is whether these are catering to the organization or the process, and some of the standards which are falling in this particular classification are environmental management system, then environmental auditing and environmental performance evaluation. Some of the standards in this ISO 14000 series cater to the actual product coming out of the entity or the organization. So for example, life cycle assessment of the product, the environmental labeling, environmental aspects in product standards and so on. So depending on whether they cater to the organization or the process, or whether they cater to the product. Again, whether these standards are compulsory or non-compulsory. So you may have normative standards, and these indicate the requirements that must be met and can be audited for certification, and in this 14000 series only one standard is of normative nature, and that is the ISO 14001. All other standards are informative standards, and they provide the guidance, and the requirements need not be audited for the certification. Till date, as of now, there are total 64 published ISO standards in this 14000 series, and 13 ISO standards are still under development, and 78 participating members are there, and then 42 observing members are there. And as I mentioned, these TC207 is the responsible technical committee of ISO, which has been drafting all these standards. So there are various subcommittees as well which are responsible for a particular theme of environmental management. So for example, you can see here it is the subcommittee 1, which is responsible for drafting all the standards catering to environmental management systems, the topic of this particular lecture. Then in environmental management, there are other topics and aspects as well. So other subcommittees also take care of those aspects. For example, you have subcommittee 2, which is responsible for environmental auditing and related environmental investigations. You have subcommittee 3 for environmental labeling of the products. You have subcommittee 4 for environmental performance evaluation, then subcommittee 5 for life cycle assessment, and then subcommittee 7 for greenhouse gas and climate change management and related activities. So here some more details about these standards. In each subcommittee, in each subtitle, various standards have already been published and they are being followed by the members, and then there are various other standards which are under development. And as you will notice, there are various stages of these standards. 60.60 means that the standard has been published, and then 90.93 is that it has been standard has also been accepted, widely accepted, and so on. And these ICS, these are various guideline documents, and following which a particular standard has been prepared, and so on. So I will just walk you through what these individual standards in each of the themes are. So the subcommittee 1 is responsible for the environmental management system. So you can see the ISO 14001, and its latest version is of 2014, and it is one of the normative standard that we had seen earlier. So it is part of this ISO subcommittee 1. Then there are, so this is environmental management systems requirements with guidance for use, one of the very important ISO 14000 standard on EMS. And then we have other standards, so ISO 14002 1 of 2019, then 14004 of 14005, and so on. So as you will notice, and I suggest that you can visit the website of ISO, take a better look on these standards and so on, and then you will get an idea how interesting and important all these standards are. So these cater to the various aspects of environmental management system. Subcommittee 2 is on environmental auditing and related investigations. So environment, what should be the guideline for environmental due diligence assessment, and so on. Subcommittee 3 is for environmental labeling. So 14020 of 2000 is environmental labels and declarations, the general principles, and then many additional things which are there. Subcommittee 4 is on environmental performance evaluation, so 14030 and so on. Subcommittee 5 is for life cycle assessment, 14040, so environmental management, life cycle assessment, principles and framework, and so on. So, and then the last subcommittee 7 is for greenhouse gas and climate change management and related activities. So 14064, 1 of 2018, and so on. So all these standards cater to various important aspects of environmental management. Now out of these, let us talk a bit more about a particular ISO 14001 standard, and which is particularly for environmental management systems requirements with guidance for use. So this ISO 14001 standard was first drafted and published, accepted in it was published in 1996. After that, couple of revisions have also happened. The first revision happened in 2004, and the most recent revision in this ISO 14001 has happened in 2015. And as of now, this ISO 14001 2015 or 2015 version is which is being followed widely. So what is this ISO 14001 standard? Basically, this is a standard which specified that if a particular organization has to implement environmental management systems, then what are the requirements for that? What should be there? How the organization should approach this particular environmental management system? What should be the key ingredients, and so on, for having a proper environmental management system? Now, it is applicable to any organization, for example any industry, for example any business entity, for example any school, for example any residential complex, hotels and so on. Any organization, if it wants, can implement the environmental management system, and the idea is how the environmental performance of the whole entity can be improved upon. So it necessarily not have to be restricted only to the industries and so on, and that is one of the very important aspect of this environmental management system or the ISO 14001, which can help any particular entity to improve their environmental performance. And then this particular standard does not state any specific environmental performance criteria. For example, your water should be water quality should be like this, or the air quality should be like this. No. So this particular ISO 14001, rather than stating specific criteria or an environment, gives a guideline of how things should be done, what are the important aspects which are to be taken care of in the environmental management system, so as the overall environmental performance will be improved. All those specifics are taken care of, or they are being addressed in other ISO 14000 series standards, but 14001 standard is only a guideline, a document. And then it can also be implemented either in its entirety or in part as per the requirements and suitability of the particular organization. However, if a particular organization wants to claim that it is meeting the certification or meeting the requirements of this ISO 14001 standard, if they want to get the certifications and things like that to promote their business and things like that, so in order to do that, they will have to implement this ISO 14001 in its entirety. They cannot have only partial implementation. So now this is the structure of the environmental management system as is being suggested by the ISO 14001. So basically, environmental management system is a written document which outlines the policies, the plannings, the work plans, the timelines and so on, which is developed by a particular the top management of a particular organization, and then they stick to it to improve the environmental performance. So this is kind of a written document, and then this 14001 series standard suggests what all should be the important ingredients or aspects which should be covered in this particular document. So as you will notice that it starts with what are the various terms and definitions. So all the terms which are related to a particular organization and leader should be properly listed down. How the planning is happening, it has to be listed down properly. The terms related to support and operation have to be listed. What is the context of the organization, so understanding the organization in its context. What are the needs and expectations of the interested parties to which a particular organization is catering to, and determining the scope of the environmental management system, which is very important, and then to define the environmental management system itself. Subsequently, the leadership and its commitment should be listed down properly. What is the management, what is the management tree and so on. And then what is the environmental policy of a particular organization. That is the one of the most important aspect of any environmental management system. And this ISO 14001 standard suggests specifically to mention this environmental policy in the EMS. Now the top management has to decide what will be the environmental policy, what will be the various roles, organizational roles, responsibilities and authorities to meet the environmental policies, and then in order to meet the policy, cater to the requirements of the policy and so on, the proper planning is to be conducted. So all the plans are to be listed down, all the action items, what are the objectives and so on. In order to achieve those plans, what all supports will be needed. So and then once you have made the plan, then all those have to be implemented. So how those implementations are going to happen, and then how the performance evaluation will be done, and then once the evaluation is being done, the iterative improvement, what will be the method of subsequent improvement in the overall strategy and the plan, and then of course various annexes or additional material which is being listed particularly for us, which will be specific for various industries and things like that. So this is the general structure of any environmental management system which is being suggested by this ISO 14001 standard. So if a particular organization builds an environmental management system, which again is a written guiding document or guidance document, which will be there for the organization to improve the environmental performance. So in this written document of environmental management system of this particular organization, industry or business entity, there are some key elements which should be present, which are being suggested by this ISO 14001. For example, the document should have environmental policy listed, which should be supported by the senior management, and then it should also clearly identify various environmental aspects catering to a particular organization and their significant impacts particularly on the environment. It should also identify what are the legal and other requirements which the particular organization is bound to follow. Once these legal requirements are identified, then the policies should set various environmental goals, various objectives and targets, and then once these are in place, then a proper environmental management program should be developed, which should be specifically listed in this written environmental management system document. And then it should also clearly define the roles and responsibilities as well as authorities of the management, various other staffs and so on. It should also list down the training and awareness procedures which will be carried out. Process for communication of EMS to the interested parties should be listed. All the operational control procedures should be properly documented. The procedures for emergency response should also be specifically included in this EMS document. And then procedure for monitoring and measuring operations that can have a significant impact on the environment should be properly listed. What should be the procedure to correct the non-conformance if it happens should also be specifically listed in this EMS. Management procedures should be properly recorded, program for auditing and corrective actions should be properly listed, and then of course what will be the process for a management review of the entire thing which is happening, so that improvement can be made. So these are some of the important elements which should be there in any environmental management system if it is to be as per ISO 14001. Now according to this ISO 14001, any EMS will have 5 main stages, and then here you can also draw similarities with the PDCA model that we have discussed earlier. So the first important stage here is the commitment and policy. That means the top management should show commitment to improve the environmental performance of the organization and so on. If the top management is not committed, that nothing is going to happen in the particular organization. So the commitment from the top management is one of the most important aspect in having any environmental management system successful. And then once that commitment is there, then accordingly a proper environmental policy should be framed. Once the policy is framed, then proper planning is to be conducted to stick to the policy, meet the requirements of the policy and so on. In this planning, the regulations which are applicable, laws which are applicable, what are the areas which need further improvement, what are the areas where adverse impacts are happening on environment, what are the areas where we are observing the violations of the standards and so on. All those things are to be identified, and in addition to that, areas where subsequent more improvement is feasible, all those things are to be identified. Realistic action plans are to be then made within a realistic time frame, and then once these action plans are made, then they are properly implemented, and in this implementation actual things happen. Of course, sometimes things do not work out as per the plan, so proper evaluation is also required just to check whether things are moving properly as per the plans, whether the objectives which are there for the policy and so on, they are being followed, they are being met or not. If not, then corrective actions are also to be taken. And once all these things are done, then in this review stage, the top management will review the entire spectra of activity which has gone into implementing this environmental management system, and in the process they will identify what has worked, what has not worked, whether our goals were realistic, whether they were very idealistic in nature and so on. And in the process, various loopholes, shortcomings in the overall process will be identified, and with this understanding, with this experience, the top management, of course, if the in-house expertise is not available, then with the help of various experts, outside experts and so on also. But idea is that with this whole review of the entire spectra of activities, the top management will have a better idea about how things should be made and how the environmental management system should be made, so as the iterative improvement in the environmental performance of the particular organization is achieved. And as you can notice, this is an iterative cyclic scheme in nature, so it's iteratively improves upon the environmental performance over the time period. And then in recent years, many of the organizations have actually recognized the benefits of adopting the environmental management system as per the guidelines of ISO 14001, how it can help in their business and so on. So they are also nowadays going for the ISO 14001 certification, which of course again is voluntary in nature, but this ISO 14001 certificate gives an added advantage to the business of the particular organization, where they come out to be a very environmentally conscious entity, and then they can find market and more environment customers which are more environmentally conscious and so on. So it in a sense helps the organization increase their business as well. Now this certification can either be in the form of self-declaration, where any organization just declares themselves that they are ISO 14001 complying. However, this self-declaration does not have much traction. It doesn't find much traction in the customer base and so on, because no one knows how they have everything has been checked and so on. So more and more number of industries and organizations are nowadays going for the third party assessment, where some third party which is certified to do this ISO 14000 certification, auditing and so on, they will come, they will check the entire spectrum of activities which are happening in the particular organization. They will check the environmental management system which has been developed by the particular organization in-house, and then they will check whether everything which is set in ISO 14001 standard, whether they are being covered properly in this particular EMS of the organization or not. and then once they are convinced, then they will certify that a particular organization is following the norms laid out in ISO 14001, and these third party certificates have more value than the self declaration. So how to go for this third party assessment or the certification? So if any particular organization, and as I mentioned earlier, this ISO 14001 EMS does not have to be restricted only to industry. Any organization, whatever the nature of the organization, can go for this ISO 14001 certification. Idea is that they have to first identify a consultant who has the authority to award these ISO 14001 certificates. Once they have identified the consultant, then proper internal training by the top management has to be done for the staff within the particular organization. They will have to identify the gaps by themselves first, and then they can also take various corrective measures so that they are convinced that their structure, the spectrum of activities which is happening in the organization, they are meeting more or less the requirements set out in the ISO 14001. Once they have a certain level of confidence, then they can apply for the certification to this third party, and then this particular agency will conduct an audit where they will check the EMS which has been developed by the particular organization. They will check the management, they will check all the activities which are happening and so on, and in the first instance they will identify which are the gaps which are still remaining and should be fulfilled. And after these gaps are identified, then the particular organization will try to fulfill those gaps, and they will try to make their process more efficient and so on. And then once they are convinced that they have done their best job, they will again ask the agency to conduct a re-audit, where the agency will again conduct the audit of all the activities which are happening, the EMS which is there and so on. And then if some gaps are still found, they may suggest those, and then those gaps are also fulfilled. And then if no major deviations from this ISO 14001 of 2015 are found, then a certificate will be provided by the third party, which can then be used by this particular organization in claiming that they are ISO 14001 certified entity and so on. So in this lecture, I have used the text from Kulkarni and Ramchandra, which is a very good book, and if you are interested, you can also go through this book. After going through the video lecture, you should be able to answer these 4 important questions. First is, what is environmental management system and what are its goals? Second is, what is PDCA model of environmental management system? Third is, why are ISO 14000 series standards are actually needed, and then what are their basic principles, and of course what are the important elements which should be present in an EMS as per the ISO 14001 standard. So I hope that you will be able to answer these questions after going through the video lecture. Thank you for your attention.